Hi, this is one of three sections for Chapter 7. So make sure to also view the videos about temperament and about attachment. I separated each one into shorter little videos. Okay, so when we talk about emotional and social development, we always want to talk about Erikson and where are children in terms of his psychosocial theory. Well, this is probably the first time we're talking about this in more detail from chapter 1, right? So we're going to get into those first stages, but let's first talk about why is his theory called the psychosocial theory? So the reason it's called that is because Erickson believed that all children go through a psychosocial conflict. Every stage we go through, we're going through a conflict. And he believed it was born within us, it was innate, and that all children would go through this universal set of stages. But depending on how the conflict was resolved, would depend on how the child came out of that conflict. So, in terms of the conflict, he developed each stage to be a positive outcome versus a more negative outcome. And when you think about these stages, it's really called psychosocial because it's a connection between the psycho and the social. The psycho is the child's psychological needs, their wants, their personality, their temperament combined with their social environment, which is their relationships, specifically caregivers in these first stages, and their culture, right? And other elements of their environment. Now, Erickson believed it was important for children to go through these crises or these conflicts positively because then they develop a healthy ratio for both sides, develop empathy and sympathy, but again, that's not always the outcome. So we're going to look at some of these conflicts. And because we're talking about infancy and toddlerhood, he has a conflict for infancy and another for toddlerhood. So here are the names of the stages: trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt. So trust versus mistrust is birth to 1 year, the first year of life. The child is going to hopefully develop the positive outcome where they develop trust within their caregivers. When they cry, their needs are met, whether it's food or needing their diaper changed or for sleep or affection. When those needs are met, the child starts to develop that sense of trust in their caregiver. So, what do we mean by quality caregiver or quality of caregiving? What kind of characteristics do you picture when you think of a quality caregiver? And again, you might have someone specific in mind or have already learned about, these kind of components, but basically it would be someone sensitive to the child's needs, affectionate, warm, loving, understanding. And that is going to lead to an outcome of trust. If the child does not get that from the parent or the caregiver, if the caregiver is not kind or compassionate to the child, or not in tune to their needs, not changing them, not feeding them when they need to, the child will start to withdraw and therefore start to develop mistrust within their own caregivers. Now, some mistrust is necessary, right? We teach children about stranger danger and other things that, might be unsafe for them. But that comes after you have that strong sense of trust. When you know who you can trust, then you start to understand those that you may not be able to just because you don't know them, and again, for other reasons. So, this outcome, again, if the child develops trust, will have a healthy ratio for both sides. If the child develops mistrust, they're taking that now into other stages where they're going to have an issue with trust and their relationships. His next stage is about developing autonomy or having an outcome of shame and doubt. And with Erickson, I think it's always important to have a good understanding of what do his terms mean. Right? So here autonomy is referring to the child being more independent. They're already developing who they are, what they like, what they don't like, part of their personality, right? So if the caregiver is supportive and encouraging of that independence, then the child will become autonomous. But if we start criticizing or attacking the child or not understanding their developmental um, abilities, then that child might start to feel shamed and start to doubt their own abilities. So, again, we need to be tolerant and understanding. When children have accidents, we don't want to react in a way that is shaming them. And again, it's part of life. And if we do it in a way that's encouraging and kind and understanding, then that child can develop the ability to be more independent, and which again is going to be a positive outcome, which will lead to more positive outcomes as they get older. So these were the first two stages of Erickson's theory. And again, he has two because he separated infancy from toddlerhood. Okay, so what about solving the conflict of the second stage? If you're autonomous, again, independent, you're one's own person and not a follower. These are leaders, right? We want children to be leaders within our society. So when I mentioned again, they would have that healthy ratio. As they get older, they could be free thinking and independent, but also ethical and considerate and responsible of others and understanding how others might feel if they are criticized or attacked. Okay, so that is the first two stages. And then I think I bring it together again here. Right. Here are those positive similarities between the two first stages: warm, sensitive, quality caregiving or parenting. Here's an important term: the parent is a secure base, and you're going to see this come up again in attachment. It's where the child uses their parent as a kind of security blanket. So when they go out in the environment, they'll stay close to their parent and kind of check in depending on how much support they need. When a child gets older, they might just, look to see where their parent is and go off and run and play. But maybe when they're younger, they're going to stay closer until they feel safe within that environment. And again, that parent is providing that feeling of safety as their secure base. Mistrust and shame and doubt are the more negative outcomes. What we find is these children have adjustment issues as they get older. They're very dependent on others. And again, because they were shamed for things they did, they stopped doing things for themselves. So that then leads to a dependence. Well, think about when you're older and get into deeper relationships. If you're overly dependent on someone else, that becomes very demanding. And again, the saddest thing at this age, infancy and toddlerhood, is that they doubt their abilities. So, again, that warm, sensitive, quality caregiving is kind of the key to a positive outcome in infancy and toddlerhood. All right. The second part of this section is emotional development within infants. And again, emotions play powerful roles in our relationships, as I'm sure you know. Some people are very calm, some people are more passionate. But with young children, we find that their facial expressions really provide cues to how they're feeling. And it's important to read those cues, especially in terms of them feeling safe. So, as I mentioned, we interpret emotions and we want to be careful about leading to error when we assume that there's this close relationship between what our child is doing and an emotional state, right? So, our child is crying every time we come to this park, so he must hate the park. Again, it could be so many other elements, right? It could be the weather, it could be maybe sounds of dogs in the area. It could be so many things to where the child is being affected. So we want to be careful about leading to an assumption of a connection between what is going on with the child and what the reason for that might be. Okay, so those first basic emotions, happiness and contentment, you'll see a smile from birth. But the social smile, where it's really starting to form a connection, is about 6 weeks. And you'll see that laugh start to happen at about 3 to 4 months. Anger, distress, that also occurs from birth. Again, babies get upset. They don't know what's going on. There's uncertainty, and outright anger can occur around 4 to 6 months. Sadness, still face is typically the first sign of sadness, and that's 2 to 7 months, which then may lead to crying, right? And fear, again, when you get to attachment and things like that, you'll see about separation anxiety and stranger anxiety. These are typical things that occur with children who have developed strong attachments with their caregivers. So, first fears in these, especially first year, is very common. Being afraid of family members, even, or Santa Claus, again, is a common occurrence in young children. Now, speaking of still face, please go on Blackboard because there is a uh, video clip about a still face experiment. And it goes into, again, how children feel when they see their mother all of a sudden have this very still face when they're used to having engagement. And you'll get to hear a little bit more about that. All right, more about the self. We'll look at a little bit about awareness, recognition, and regulation. First, self conscious emotions. Again, we talked about shame and doubt. This is typically the age that children start to feel those emotions and don't really know what's happening. Maybe their face is turning bright red and they're getting embarrassed. So sometimes, if an adult notices this is happening, they can guide them through those emotions. Self awareness. Did you know that we're not born with the understanding that we're a self? Most babies will look in a mirror and kind of wave and look for where is the baby, right? They don't know that that's them. They don't know what they look like. So it's very limited in terms of their self awareness. But as they get older, they'll start to understand, oh, that's me in the mirror. Oh, I'm throwing this spoon and mom is getting it. So they start to understand the concept of self at around 20 months, maybe sometimes a little bit younger, sometimes a little bit older, but typically before 2 years old. They start to understand that they're a self that affects others. This is also referred to as agency, where again, the child understands they're an agent in their own development. Well, what then happens at 2 years old for most children? Terrible twos, because again, they start to understand that cause effect relationship. If I do this, this happens. And they start trying it out at around 2 years old. Please watch the video clip on Blackboard about self recognition. They put a little rouge or blush on children and then have them look in a mirror. And depending on their age, you'll see at what age do children start to recognize, oh, that's me, and maybe start to wipe off that blush. Okay, so the other thing about emotions, and again, self awareness, is once we start to have an understanding that we're a self and start to understand our own feelings, then we can start to have an understanding about others' state of mind, right? And toddlers start to express signs of empathy. Maybe they see someone who's crying and they go to them and maybe start to wipe their tears. Toddlers cry a lot, right? Empathy is making a connection because you've gone through something similar. You've both cried before. So a toddler might come and wipe your tears because they don't want you to be sad. They've been sad and they know that feeling. But they also start to understand awareness of others' feelings and supporting them, even if they don't know what they're going through, right? They might just see someone is upset and want to go comfort them because they feel for them. Those, again, come with the ability to understand that what we do affects others, which starts to come right around toddlerhood. And lastly, self regulation. Children, again, don't always know how to regulate their own emotions, how to deal with these feelings that come up. It gets a little bit easier as they have more brain development. But again, a lot of them rely on caregivers to help soothe them when they're feeling upset. Um, and as they get more language, they can start expressing more about what's going on. And lastly, caregivers contribute to how we regulate. If we see our parents act very dramatically about certain things, we might act in a very similar manner, right? So that's again that culture part of going through these stages that Erickson was referring to. We're very much influenced by those around us. All right, thank you guys, and please email me if you have any questions.